A paper bag slipped from the boy's trembling hands just as the old woman began to collapse. The sandwich inside burst open against the pavement, scattering crumbs across the cold sidewalk. Without pausing to think, the boy dropped to his knees, lifted the frail woman by her shoulders, and pressed his only bottle of water into her husband's shaking hands. "You drink first," he whispered. The old man looked at the sandwich lying in the dirt, then at the boy's hollow cheeks. "But son, this was your dinner." The boy forced a tired smile that hid more hunger than hope. "I'll be all right." Across the street, behind the dark-tinted window of a black luxury sedan, someone quietly lowered a pair of binoculars. No one noticed. Not the exhausted couple. Not the hungry boy. Not even the driver, who stared straight ahead as though nothing unusual had happened. But the passenger in the back seat never took his eyes off the boy. He murmured only one sentence. "So, it really is him." Before we continue, subscribe if you enjoy unforgettable stories like this. Give this video a like, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The evening wind carried the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery. For Elijah Carter, the scent was almost painful. At just 14 years old, Elijah had learned that hunger came in waves. The first wave made his stomach ache. The second made him dizzy. The third convinced him he could survive another day without eating. Tonight, he had reached the third. Every weekday after school, Elijah swept floors inside a small neighborhood grocery store. The owner couldn't afford to pay much, but every evening he handed Elijah enough money to buy a cheap sandwich before walking home to the tiny house where he lived alone with his grandmother. His grandmother believed Elijah always ate at work. Elijah believed she always ate at home. Neither knew the other was secretly skipping meals. That quiet sacrifice had become their unspoken language of love. The elderly couple sat against the brick wall, wrapped in thin coats that offered little protection from the autumn chill. The old woman's breathing had become shallow. Elijah crouched beside them. "When was the last time you both ate?" The old man hesitated. "I don't remember." Elijah didn't ask another question. He simply gathered the sandwich from the ground, brushed away what dirt he could, separated the clean half, and handed every edible piece to them. The old woman tried to refuse. "No, sweetheart. You're just a child." Elijah smiled again. "I had lunch." It was a lie. One that sounded almost convincing. The old man slowly accepted the food. His eyes filled with tears. "You remind me of someone." Elijah shrugged. "My grandma says kindness always comes back." The old man lowered his head. "I used to believe that." As the couple quietly ate, Elijah helped them into an empty bus shelter to escape the wind. He removed his only hoodie and gently draped it over the old woman's shoulders. The temperature continued to fall. Elijah walked home wearing only his faded school uniform. The black sedan remained parked across the street until he disappeared around the corner. Inside the vehicle sat William Sterling, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the country. Newspapers called him a financial genius. His competitors called him ruthless. His employees feared him. Yet none of them knew the truth. William had not slept through a single night in nearly 3 years. Every morning he woke from the same nightmare. Every night he searched for something he could never explain. His personal assistant glanced into the rear-view mirror. "Sir, should I contact security?" William didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the empty pavement where Elijah had vanished. "Find out everything." The assistant frowned. "Everything, about a schoolboy?" William's voice became strangely quiet. "I've spent 20 years looking for someone exactly like him." The car slowly pulled away. Miles across town, Elijah opened the squeaking front door of his small home. His grandmother sat knitting beneath a flickering lamp. "There you are," she smiled warmly. "Did you enjoy your supper?" Elijah forced another smile. It was good. She nodded, relieved. I wasn't hungry anyway. Elijah froze. She had lied too. Neither exposed the other. Instead, they shared tea made from little more than hot water and a single tea bag that had already been used twice. That night Elijah lay awake listening to his stomach growl. Outside, rain began tapping against the roof. Around midnight, headlights briefly illuminated the house before disappearing into the darkness. Someone had found where he lived. The following morning, before the sun had fully risen, 3 identical black vehicles rolled silently into the narrow street. Neighbors peeked through curtains. Children stopped on their way to school. No one had ever seen cars like these in their forgotten neighborhood. The lead vehicle stopped directly outside Elijah's weathered front gate. A sharply dressed chauffeur stepped out first. Then another man. Finally, William Sterling himself emerged. Without saying a word, the billionaire walked to the front door. He lifted his hand. Knocked 3 times. And before anyone inside could answer, a frightened voice called out from behind him. Mr. Sterling. William turned. The elderly man from the night before stood at the end of the street. His face had gone completely pale. You cannot tell him who he really is. Everything suddenly went silent. Even the birds seemed to disappear from the morning air. William Sterling slowly lowered his hand from the weathered door. His expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, a mixture of shock and recognition. The elderly man hurried forward, breathing heavily. His wife struggled to keep pace, clutching the hoodie Elijah had given her the night before. Please, the old man pleaded. Not here. William studied him for several long seconds. I wondered how long it would take before you found me, Benjamin. Elijah, hearing voices outside, carefully opened the front door. His grandmother appeared behind him. The elderly couple. The billionaire. 3 black luxury vehicles. None of it made sense. Elijah looked from one stranger to the next. Is something wrong? No one answered. Instead, every pair of eyes settled on him. William finally spoke. Elijah, may I come inside? His grandmother instinctively stepped between the boy and the visitors. We don't know you. William nodded respectfully. You don't. He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a small leather wallet. Inside was an old, faded photograph. He carefully held it out. The grandmother's face drained of color. Her knitting basket slipped from her hands. The photograph showed a smiling young couple holding a newborn baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Standing beside them was William. 20 years younger. Elijah frowned. Grandma. She couldn't speak. Her hands trembled uncontrollably. William's voice softened. I promised someone I would never stop looking. Before another word could be spoken, Benjamin stepped forward. You promised something else too. William met his stare. I know exactly what I promised. And you're about to break it. Elijah's confusion deepened. What is everyone talking about? His grandmother finally found her voice. Inside. No one argued. The tiny living room barely had enough chairs for 4 people. Now 7 stood awkwardly among worn furniture that had clearly survived decades of use. William looked around quietly. Nothing about the home suggested wealth. Nothing suggested secrets. Yet he could almost feel them hidden inside every wall. Elijah noticed William staring at an old wooden shelf. Only 3 photographs sat upon it. None showed Elijah as a baby. None showed his parents. He had stopped asking why years ago. William noticed that too. You've never seen pictures of your mother. It wasn't a question. Elijah slowly shook his head. My grandma always says looking backward doesn't change tomorrow. The old woman lowered her eyes. I said that because I didn't know how to explain yesterday. Silence settled again. William gently placed another object onto the coffee table. A silver pocket watch. Old. Scratched. Almost worthless in appearance. Elijah's eyes widened. I've seen that before. William leaned forward. Where? Elijah hesitated. In dreams. Everyone froze. He immediately looked embarrassed. I know how that sounds. No, William whispered. You have no idea. Benjamin stood abruptly. This is exactly why you shouldn't have come. William rose to face him. He deserves answers. He deserves a life that isn't destroyed by the past. The past already found him. Their voices remained calm. That somehow made the argument even more unsettling. Elijah's grandmother slowly reached for the pocket watch. When she opened it, a tiny melody filled the room. Elijah instinctively finished the tune by softly humming the final notes. No one had ever taught it to him. William's breathing stopped. Benjamin closed his eyes. The grandmother began to cry. Elijah looked around in disbelief. What? William spoke carefully. How do you know that melody? Elijah shrugged uneasily. I've always known it. William's voice became barely audible. It was never released. Elijah blinked. What? My wife composed that lullaby for our son. The room fell into complete silence. Benjamin immediately interrupted. That proves nothing. William ignored him. We recorded it once. He looked directly at Elijah. The recording was destroyed in a fire 20 years ago. Elijah laughed nervously. You're saying I somehow memorized a song that no one has heard? William didn't answer. Because he couldn't. He had spent years chasing impossible clues. Anonymous letters. False leads. Private investigators. Even psychics. Every trail had ended in disappointment. Until yesterday. Until he watched a hungry boy give away his last meal without expecting anything in return. Exactly as another little boy had done decades earlier. Elijah suddenly stood. I don't understand why you're looking at me like that. Neither did he understand why his heart had started racing. Or why seeing William's face felt strangely familiar. The billionaire reached into his briefcase one last time. This time he removed a sealed envelope. It was yellow with age. Across the front, written in elegant handwriting, were just 7 words. To be opened only if Elijah is found. Elijah stared at his own name. His grandmother gasped. Benjamin whispered under his breath. No. William slowly placed the envelope onto the table. I've carried this for 19 years. Elijah looked at the faded handwriting. My name. William nodded. It was written before you were old enough to read. Elijah's grandmother suddenly lunged forward, snatching the envelope from the table before anyone else could touch it. You can't open this. William's eyes narrowed. You know what's inside. Tears streamed down her face. I know who wrote it. Elijah turned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. Grandma. She hugged the envelope tightly against her chest. Then she spoke the words Elijah had waited his entire life to hear. I've lied to you since the day I brought you home. Before Elijah could respond, a deafening crash echoed outside. One of William's security guards was hurled through the front window. Glass exploded across the room. The guard slammed onto the floor, unconscious. Behind the shattered doorway stood 3 masked men. One of them pointed directly at Elijah. There he is. The leader slowly raised a handgun. Take the boy, alive. The words hit the room harder than the shattering glass. William reacted first. Down. He threw himself toward Elijah just as another shot ripped through the front window. The bullet buried itself in the wall where the boy had been standing only a heartbeat earlier. The elderly grandmother screamed. Benjamin pulled his wife behind the overturned sofa. William's security team rushed forward, forcing the masked men back outside, but the attackers were disciplined. They weren't firing wildly. They moved with military precision, covering each other as they retreated toward the waiting vehicles. One of them shouted, "We have confirmation. It's him." Then they disappeared. Tires screamed. Within seconds, the street fell eerily quiet again. William's chief of security rushed inside. "Sir, they've gone." William didn't look away from Elijah. "No." His voice was steady. "They've only realized we found him first." Elijah stared at the shattered remains of his front window. His entire body trembled. "They weren't robbers." William slowly shook his head. "They came for you." "But why?" No one answered. "Because no one wanted to." Outside, neighbors cautiously emerged from their homes, whispering in disbelief. Police sirens echoed somewhere in the distance. William turned to his security chief. "We're leaving. Now." Elijah stepped back. "I'm not going anywhere." William met his eyes. "If you stay here, they'll return. My grandmother isn't leaving this house." "I know. I don't even know who you are." William closed his eyes for a brief moment. "No, but someone else does." He looked directly at Elijah's grandmother. "It's time." The old woman sank into a chair, still clutching the unopened envelope. "I prayed this day would never come." Elijah knelt beside her. "Please." For years he had respected every silence. Accepted every missing photograph. Ignored every unanswered question. "Not anymore. Tell me." She gently touched his face. "When you were a baby, your mother placed you in my arms." Elijah's heartbeat quickened. "She said there were people who wanted your family destroyed." William lowered his head. The grandmother continued. "She told me that if anyone ever discovered where you were, I had to disappear with you." Elijah whispered, "My mother, is she alive?" The old woman's tears answered before her words could. "No." The room seemed to tilt. Elijah could barely breathe. "And my father?" This time. She looked at William. Elijah slowly turned. William stood perfectly still. His face had become almost impossible to read. Finally, he spoke. "I failed them both." Elijah frowned. "What does that mean?" William didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the broken window and looked outside at the growing crowd. "When I was younger, I believed success could solve every problem." His reflection stared back at him in the remaining shards of glass. "I built companies. I built fortunes. But while I was building an empire..." His voice cracked for the first time. "Someone else was destroying my family." Elijah had never imagined a billionaire could sound so broken. William continued. "They kidnapped my wife and my infant son. They demanded everything. I gave them everything. My money. My businesses. My future. It wasn't enough." Elijah felt a chill run through him. "They took your son?" William nodded. "They burned the house. There were no survivors. At least." His eyes filled with tears. "That's what everyone believed." Silence settled over the room. Elijah glanced toward the unopened envelope. Then back at William. "What does any of this have to do with me?" Before William could answer, Benjamin spoke. "Because that wasn't the whole truth. Every head turned toward him. Benjamin slowly removed an old leather notebook from inside his coat. "I've carried this for 20 years. He placed it beside the envelope. "I was the ambulance driver who reached the fire first." William stared at him. "You disappeared." "I had to." Benjamin opened the notebook. Inside were faded reports. Handwritten sketches. Names. Dates. Photographs. "I found something the police never did." He turned one page. Then another. Finally stopping on a picture of a tiny blue blanket. The same one from William's faded photograph. It wasn't inside the house. William's breathing became shallow. Benjamin looked directly at Elijah. It was outside. Elijah frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means someone carried a baby out before the fire spread." William whispered, almost afraid to hear the answer. "The baby survived." Benjamin nodded slowly. "But whoever rescued him vanished before anyone else arrived." Elijah looked at his grandmother. She couldn't meet his eyes. He stood. "No." His voice shook. "No." He backed away. "This can't be." The old woman broke down completely. "I never wanted to lie. You promised to tell me when I turned 18. Elijah stared. "What?" Benjamin looked confused. 18? She nodded through tears. That was her mother's final wish. William frowned. "Why 18? The grandmother looked at the unopened envelope. "Because that's when he would finally be old enough to choose." Elijah's head spun. "Choose what?" No one answered. Instead, William carefully picked up the envelope. He held it toward Elijah. "This belongs to you." Elijah reached out. His fingers trembled as they touched the aged paper. He slowly broke the seal. Inside, there was only one handwritten letter. And one small brass key. Elijah unfolded the letter. His eyes immediately found the first line. "My dearest Elijah." The handwriting was elegant. Gentle. Almost alive. As he continued reading, tears began to roll down his face. It was unmistakable. A mother's final words. She wrote of love. Of sacrifice. Of hope. Then, halfway through the letter, Elijah suddenly stopped reading. His face turned pale. William noticed immediately. "What is it?" Elijah looked up in disbelief. There's another name." "What name?" Elijah swallowed hard. "It says." He could barely force the words out. "Never trust Victor Langston." The room froze. William's security chief looked horrified. William himself went completely still. Elijah frowned. "Who is Victor Langston?" William answered in a whisper. "He isn't just anyone. He's my oldest friend." Before anyone could process those words, William's mobile phone rang. His security chief glanced at the screen. Then his face lost all color. "Sir." "What?" The chief looked at him with disbelief. "The call." He slowly turned the phone around. "Is coming from Victor Langston." William answered. There was only silence. Then a calm, familiar voice spoke. "You should have left the boy buried in the past." The line went dead. At that exact moment, the brass key in Elijah's hand slipped onto the floor. It struck the wooden boards with a metallic click. His grandmother gasped. Because engraved on the key was the address of a safety deposit box she had prayed no one would ever find. The room remained frozen as everyone stared at the brass key. Elijah's grandmother slowly sank back into her chair. "I thought it had been destroyed." William picked up the key carefully, turning it over in his hand. The engraved address belonged to a small community bank nearly 200 miles away, a bank that had closed years earlier, except for one underground vault that still honored its oldest safety deposit contracts. William looked at Elijah. "We're going." Benjamin immediately shook his head. "Victor will already be expecting that." William nodded. "Which is exactly why we can't waste another minute." Within an hour, the convoy quietly left the neighborhood. This time, 2 additional security vehicles joined them. Elijah sat silently beside his grandmother. He still clutched his mother's letter. He had read it 4 times. Each reading hurt more than the last. Yet one sentence refused to leave his mind. "If you are reading this, kindness has protected you better than money ever could." He thought about the sandwich. About the elderly couple. About the life he had always believed was ordinary. Nothing felt ordinary anymore. As the convoy reached the abandoned bank, William's security team swept the building. All clear. The group descended into the underground vault. The manager, now an elderly man himself, studied the brass key before unlocking a thick steel door. "There hasn't been a visitor for this box in almost 20 years. He stepped aside. William gently pulled out the small metal container. Inside, there were no gold bars. No diamonds. No hidden fortune. Only 3 things. A worn leather journal. A digital video recorder. And a sealed envelope marked, 'To my son.'" Elijah's hands trembled. William quietly pressed the power button on the recorder. The screen flickered. A young woman appeared. She smiled through tears. She looked exactly like the woman in the faded photograph. Elijah covered his mouth. His mother looked directly into the camera. "If you're seeing this, then God answered my final prayer." She paused, struggling to hold back emotion. "My beautiful boy, if life has been hard, I'm sorry. I wanted to watch you grow. I wanted to hear your first words. I wanted to see the man you would become." She smiled again. "But someone wanted your father's company more than they wanted our lives." William lowered his head. The woman continued. "Victor Langston wasn't just your father's business partner. He secretly controlled the criminal network that staged our kidnapping." Elijah felt his heart pounding. "He wanted your father's empire. When he realized your father would surrender everything to save us, he decided to erase our family instead." She looked away briefly before continuing. "But Victor never knew one thing." She smiled. "You escaped." William slowly closed his eyes. "I asked Benjamin to take you." Benjamin nodded quietly. "Your grandmother agreed to raise you because no one would ever suspect a retired schoolteacher living in poverty." Elijah looked at his grandmother. "You gave up your whole life." She smiled through tears. "I gained a grandson." The video continued. "Elijah, never judge your father by what he lost. Judge him by what he never stopped searching for." William could no longer hide his tears. "I looked everywhere." "I know." Elijah spoke softly. "I believe you." William looked up. For the first time in 20 years. Hope returned to his face. Then the final part of the recording played. "If Victor is still alive, he'll eventually discover the truth. So I've left every piece of evidence inside this journal." William opened it. Every page documented financial records. Secret accounts. Names. Photographs. Signed confessions. Enough evidence to expose Victor's crimes beyond any doubt. Suddenly, one of William's security officers burst into the vault. "Sir." William looked up. "What is it?" "They found us." The lights instantly went dark. Emergency alarms echoed through the underground chamber. A familiar voice boomed through the building's speaker system. "William." Victor Langston laughed. "You always were predictable." The vault doors began to close automatically. Security guards rushed to stop them. Too late. The heavy steel doors slammed shut. Victor's voice echoed again. "You spent 20 years searching for your son. I spent 20 years making sure you would never enjoy finding him." Smoke began pouring through the ventilation system. The elderly bank manager collapsed first. Elijah looked around frantically. "There has to be another way out." Benjamin pointed toward an old maintenance tunnel. "There." The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person at a time. William immediately turned to Elijah. "You first." Elijah shook his head. "No." William frowned. "Go." Elijah stood his ground. "My grandmother goes first." She protested. "No, Elijah. You spent 14 years protecting me." He smiled gently. "It's my turn." Benjamin helped the elderly women into the tunnel. The security team followed. William remained beside Elijah until everyone else had escaped. Only then did they crawl through the narrow passage together. Moments later, the vault exploded behind them. The blast shook the entire building. But they were already outside. Within minutes, police surrounded the area. Victor's men attempted to flee. They never made it. The evidence recovered from the journal, combined with years of hidden financial records, dismantled the entire criminal organization. Victor Langston was arrested before sunset. Weeks later, reporters crowded outside William Sterling's headquarters, expecting a triumphant press conference. Instead, William stepped away from the podium. He invited Elijah to stand beside him. The room fell silent. William smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, the greatest investment I have ever witnessed wasn't made with money." He looked proudly at Elijah. "It was made with a single sandwich." The reporters looked confused. William continued. "A hungry 14-year-old boy gave away his only meal to help two strangers. He expected nothing in return. That one act of kindness reminded an old man never to lose faith." He nodded toward Benjamin. "Brought long-buried truth into the light." He smiled at Elijah's grandmother. "And reunited a broken family." Elijah quietly added. "My grandmother always said kindness comes back." He smiled. "I just never imagined it would knock on the front door." The audience rose to its feet. Not because a billionaire had found his son, but because a poor boy had never allowed poverty to steal his compassion. Months later, Elijah and his grandmother still lived together. The little house was repaired, but never forgotten. Elijah insisted that every weekend, he and William personally served meals at community shelters. Whenever someone asked why, William always gave the same answer. Because the richest people aren't the ones who keep everything. They're the ones who still choose to give when they have almost nothing. And every year, on the anniversary of that cold autumn evening, 3 people shared one simple meal together. Elijah, his grandmother, and Benjamin. They always left one empty chair. Not for sadness, but to honor the woman whose final act of courage made forgiveness possible. Some stories begin with wealth. Others begin with loss. But the ones people remember forever begin with kindness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes that one small act of kindness can change a life. Because sometimes it changes many.